Om Sahanavadu Sahanavnatu Sahaviryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So yesterday I was discussing this transition of human evolution from the empirical, from the ephemeral to the higher transcendental spiritual dimension. How Nachiketa asks for the highest spiritual wisdom to be instructed to him. That the particular verse is Yayam Prete Vijikitsa Manushi Asti Tege Nayam Asti Vijayi Edad Vidya Manushistastoyaham Varana Mesha Varastatiya. In fact, he doesn't directly put in so many words that he wants to be taught the highest spiritual truth. That's not what he's asking. What he's asking in his own words is this: what is the mystery of human life, and what's the mystery of human death? If you can unravel the mystery of death, then you can understand the mystery of life. Because life and death are interrelated. Death means the end of the physical body. Now, if something remains after death, then it means existence is immortal. If nothing remains, then life is a very simple, a single journey that begins with the cradle, ending with the crematorium. That's all. It doesn't really have any significance if we have only one life. And if that life ends in permanent residence in heaven, then also there is nothing very special about it. And heaven is nothing but a place where we enjoy. We get everything that we want. So Nachiketa wants to know, is there something beyond life and death, beyond life in this world and beyond life in heaven? That's what he's asking. So in response to this, Yama first tries to make sure that this boy deserves to be taught the highest spiritual truth. Because if we are not fit to learn the highest truth, then even if we are instructed, we won't learn it. Often we learn according to our own spiritual evolution. We don't learn what we are taught. We only learn what we are capable of understanding, capable of observing. So, spiritual fitness is a very important factor in understanding not only the highest spiritual experience, but even spiritual philosophy. There's a basic difference between Vedanta as a matter of spiritual experience and Vedanta as a doctrine. If we approach Vedanta as a doctrine, we'll lose everything. Sometimes this happens. Sometimes we look upon Vedanta as a system of philosophy, the way we look upon the systems of Aristotle, J.S. Mill, or Kant, or Berkeley, and others. It's a total mistake. Vedanta does have a philosophical dimension, but one of the greatest and most important statements that Shankaracharya makes again and again is Anubhava Avasanatvat. Spiritual inquiry ends with inner intuitive experience. Now, here, when Yama, the teacher, tried to test the boy, he puts before him a number of temptations. I shall make you the emperor of the world. I can fulfill all your other desires. I can give you plenty of chariots, horses. Tavaiva vakas tava nritya gite, the statement in the Kathopanishad. So Yama told him, well, I can give you plenty of chariots driven by wonderful horses, and I can have people surrounding you, dancing and singing wonderful classical music. But Nachiketa rejected the whole thing with one statement: your chariots, all these wonderful things you take for yourself, I don't need. Tavaiva vahas tava nirtyaki, that's yours, not mine. And the teacher was happy. Remember, we never learn spiritual inquiry unless we leave something behind, unless we give up something behind. Often we are forced to give up. Nature or destiny catches by the throat and may make us give up things. That's what happens to many. Tragedies, shocking experiences sometimes make us make a turn, force us to take a turn to spiritual life. That's fine. But the wisdom of Upanishad says that it enables us to open our eyes before our fate, the destiny compels us to open our eyes, catching us by the throat. Therefore, unless we give up something, unless we realize the transitoriness, the perishable nature of this world, we will never even be able to understand intellectually the subtleties of spiritual philosophy. Even to intellectually understand a philosophical doctrine about spiritual life, we need to practice some kind of renunciation. So natural aversion to world and all that is related to worldly life, including this body, including the possessions, including money and wealth. Without this aversion, it's really not aversion, it is a very intelligent way of understanding the limitations and then giving up. That's what really is. But then aversion is the English word frequently used, so I'm using that. Without this, we cannot even intellectually understand spiritual philosophy. Therefore, when Yama found that the little boy was fully fit to be taught the highest spiritual truth, he becomes a very compassionate, a very liberal, a very generous teacher and teaches him the highest spiritual truth. Yesterday I mentioned this: Anuraniyan makoto mahiyan atma sejinto hidam gukayam tamakruduk pasyadi vedashogha dhadu prasada mahimanam atmanaha. Yama teaches this truth. This absolute reality is residing in you, in me, in everything. It is present in the minutest of the minute and also in the grandest of the grand. You realize this truth through the practice of purity of mind, unselfishness and meditation and spiritual contemplation. And once you realize this, you can reach the truth. In the process, he gives a very wonderful imagery in which he compares human life into a journey in a chariot. Say, look upon the chariot. You can say the car perhaps, modern times. Yama uses the word Atmanam Rithinam Viddhi Sariram Rithamevacha Buddhim tu Saradhim Viddhi Mana Pragrahamevacha. That's what he says. So, Indriyani Paranyahu Vishayansteshu Gojaran Atmendriya Manoyuktam Bhokta iti ahu manishinaha. So two statements, two verses in the Kathopanishad. The imagery is very great, very grand. So think of our whole life as a journey, as a movement, as a travel in a chariot. The chariot is our body. The chariot belongs to Atma. We are traveling the chariot. Intellect is the driver, the rider. Horses are our senses of action, senses of perception, which go in all directions. And mind is the reins with which the charioteer controls the horses. And there is a road, the path, that's the path of this world, the world of sensory experiences, sense objects, good and bad, happy and unhappy, pain and pleasure, and so on. Now, here, the whole journey and its success and and what happens to the horses all depend upon a few important factors. First, the rider should be a sensible person. If he's a drunkard, even if the horses are of the best quality, he won't be able to take you to your destination. So he should be a sensible person. He should be wise. He should have learned the principles of dharma, and also he should have learned the limitations of material prosperity. Not that he need not be an ascetic. You can be the richest person in the world, still you can be a man of renunciation. As you find in the Vedantic Upanishad, one of the greatest teachers of the Vedantic Upanishad is a king and emperor who was busy all his lifetime. And equally great, if not greater, was an ascetic, all-renouncing monk, a great monk, Yajnavalkya. And equally great was a lady, Gargi. And equally great was Yajnavalkya's wife. Before he renounced his world, he was a married person. Her name was Maitreyi. So you find here renunciation or its absence is all in mind. Therefore, the Upanishad says the horses should be perfectly under control, which means the rider should be a sensible person who can control the horses with reins. It is a mind. So the rider is intellect, buddhi, reins the mind, the mana, and horses are the senses of perception, senses of action. Now, if the horses are not perfectly controlled, if the senses are not within our control, if the senses dictate terms to the mind, and if mind dictates terms to the intellect, then what happens? We become slaves of our senses. So mind is distracted in all directions. All the 10 indriyas or senses of the mind, all these 10 senses, the senses of perception and senses of action, drag the mind in all directions, in the directions of sensory objects. So mind gets completely distracted and dissipated. There is a verse in the Viveka Chudamani, Shankaracharya, Sabdadipi Panjabireva Panja Panjattamapusa Gunena Bethaha Guranga Madanga Padanga Minaha Bhunga Narapanjabhiranchita Kim. So Shankaracharya, who wrote in the 8th century, he says, mind is always being driven in all directions by the senses. So again he gives the example of some members of the animal kingdom. See the deer, maybe in ancient times, the hunters used to hunt down deers by using flute, some kind of musical instrument. As he sings, the deer, hearing this music, comes out of the bushes or the caves in which they are hiding, and they are shot and killed. They are shot by arrows and killed by the hunter. And then Madanga means elephant. So in the case of deers, they are cheated, they lose their life because their mind is distracted by the temptation of the sense of hearing, and they lose their life. And what about elephants? Elephants moves in herds in the forests. And you find, if you watch the photos, you find elephants, they touch each other, they protect the baby elephants, and they hold their hands. And what happens, and they fall in a pit, and frequently they are trapped and they are killed or enslaved for their life. So they are caught by the sense of touch. And padanga means they are flying these little moths. During rainy season, they emerge in large numbers, and when they see a fire burning out, blazing a fire, they are drawn towards it because they see them and they think this fire is something very attractive, they fly towards them and they are killed. And what about fish? Fish may be caught by its attraction for taste of the bait, because that's how fishermen catch fish. And then certain other honeybees or other creatures, they go from flower to flower collecting honey. In the process, they are killed by bigger creatures, so they lose their life. So in the case of these honeybees, maybe the sense of smell. In the case of moth, the sense of vision, sense of sight, sense of sound, sense of touch, sense of smell. All these become temptations. Now the Upanishad says they constitute the path, the world in which the chariot is being driven. So we live in the world, we have to live in the world, we cannot run away from the world. But then once we keep this in mind, then our journey becomes smooth. In the subsequent verses, the Upanishad says, Vijnana Saradhiryastu. Suppose the rider of the chariot is an intelligent person, a wise person, he will be able to control the horses properly with the help of reins, that is mind, which is in his hands. And then if there's a pit, if there's a precipice, he will be able to avoid those points and reach the destination as he wants. So also in spiritual life. In spiritual life, all that we require is a little wisdom. A little wisdom. We may need money, wealth, everything popular. See, Vedanta is not just for, it's not meant for ascetics alone. Swami Vivekananda's, one of his greatest contribution of Swami Vivekananda was that he interpreted Vedanta as a spiritual way of life that could be practiced by everyone. By no matter what his or her profession is, everyone can practice it. So all that we need is a little bit of wisdom, Vijnana Sarathi. So this Vijnanam, this wisdom, if the Sarathi, the rider of the chariot, has got a little of this wisdom, then he will be able to control his senses, that is horses, with his mind. But if the mind is broken, if the reins are broken, and if the horses are indisciplined, and the rider is drunk, and if the road is full of potholes, you can imagine the destination. So it is this spiritual philosophy that is very graphically explained in the Kathopanishad. Now, coming from Vedas to Vedanta, you find in the Chandogya Upanishad a very, very unique, a very wonderful way of explaining the process of the spiritual journey. It is very, very famous. The verse, I would like to read a few of this, then I will explain. For those of you who are interested, you can refer later. The 6th chapter, 14th Brahmanam is called section, the first mantra. Yatha soumya purusham gandharibhyo abhinadhakshamaniya tam tataha adhijani visrajya sayatha yatta prangva udangva dhirangva pratyangva padhaniya abhinadhaksha anitaha abhinadhaksho visrishta. Very interesting episode. The teacher, the great teacher, Uddalaka, father, is teaching his son. Yesterday we discussed this, day for yesterday also. How the little boy, Swetaketu, who was left at home by his father, started to get education, and he went to the village, the distant hermitage, and got education for 12 years under a great teacher, and returned home, and Uddalaka, the father, found the boy had become so conceited, so arrogant, and so proud of his learning. So the father asked him, Did you learn that by knowing which everything becomes known? Did you learn higher spiritual wisdom? That's the question. And the boy said, no, I didn't know that. I didn't learn that. Perhaps my teachers didn't know about it. I will not taught me. And Shankaracharya's commentary, if you read fine, he was afraid he will be sent back to school. Because Shankaracharya gives some interesting remarks. He had a very high opinion about himself. And so he thought, if the teachers had known that, they would have taught it, but he thought he was a very wonderful student, so the teacher would not have skipped that portion while teaching in the class. And again, Shankaracharya in a very humorous basis, perhaps the fellow was afraid he will be sent back to the school. Anyway, now the father begins his instruction, this higher spiritual truth. And there is a very interesting imagery, illustration, which is historically very important because it's a historical fact that there was a link, a land road connecting into Ganges Valley with Afghanistan and also Iran. Today, at that time it is known as Persia, now it's called Iran. So there was this land route. So here the story is taken from that setting. A wanderer, a traveler, was going back to Afghanistan. Gandhara. See, the name of this particular section of the Upanishad is Gandhara Purusha Drishtantaka, illustration of the traveler who is returning to Kabul or Kandahar, that is in today's Afghanistan. That's the name of this particular section of the Upanishad. An illustration taken from the life of a person who had come to India for undergoing Vedic education and now returning to Kandahar. Gandhara is the Sanskritized old name of Kandahar, or maybe Kabul. Now, this man who had spent long years in India and he was returning home, and his home was in Kandahar in Afghanistan. On the way, he had to pass through thick forest roads, narrow lanes surrounded by thick forests. And it so happened that he was ambushed and robbed by a group of robbers on the way. They took him to the nearby forest, thick forest, full of tigers, lions, all wild animals. All these are important because the parable or the imagery is so comprehensive. So you have to take all this into consideration. This man was returning home, which is in Afghanistan, and he was caught, he was ambushed, he was blindfolded. That's also important. And then he was tied and dragged into a thick forest and tied to a tree. And it was the thick forest was surrounded by wild animals. And now, after some time, after the thieves left the place, he started crying and weeping. Hearing this sound, some compassionate travelers who were returning from Kandahar, coming to India, they approached him. They heard this sound coming from. This wailing sound, crying and weeping are very important in the imagery. Got a deep spiritual significance. As we proceed further, we'll understand. The blindfold, the noises he was making from the thick forests, and the teacher hearing, all these are important in the imagery, in the illustration. The drishtanta is called illustration. So hearing this sound, some compassionate travelers who were returning from there went to where he was tied and blindfolded and untied the knots, released him from the bondage and removed the blindfold and brought him to the narrow lane that would take him back to Kandahar, Gandhara Desha. Now this is the story. And then he started his journey back. And when he traveled back to Gandhara Desha, there will be many interjections, junctions, 4 roads meeting on one point. So he should know very well which route to make. If he doesn't take the right route, maybe he may come back to where he left, to where he started. So, or his journey may end in a precipice. So he may get completely lost. So he should be able to find out what road to take as he returned home. He should be intelligent enough to clearly understand instructions given by the kind-hearted traveler. The kind-hearted traveler is the teacher, and the poor traveler who was ambushed and blindfolded and robbed by the thieves, he is a spiritual seeker. The forest is this world. The blindfold is our ignorance, our delusion. Many of us, many people, as I said earlier, believe that this world is the best thing that we can ever have. Unless we have done a lot of good spiritual deeds in the past life, which manifests in the form of spiritual wisdom, or sometimes it happens in the form of some shocking events in our life. Otherwise, we do not find anything wrong with this world. And so long as we do not find anything wrong with this world, we cannot be anything in this world, in the true sense of the term. Even to be a poet, to be a philosopher, to be a mystic, not necessarily the highest spiritual enlightened person. Even to achieve anything in a remarkable way, you should have some complaint about the world in which we are living. Otherwise, we won't be any better than animals. Healthy, intelligent, efficient animals. That's all. So, here you find the poor man, the poor traveler, the unfortunate traveler who was robbed, ambushed and blindfolded by the thieves and taken to the thick forest. He is a spiritual seeker. If he is really spiritual seeker, then he will make some attempt. If he goes to Berkeley Library, he may take a book at least by Emerson or Gita, or maybe any Upanishad or Bible or any spiritual literature, or any religious tradition, whatever may be. Something that tells him something about some transcendental things, which may not be closely linked to a few dollars. I mean, he should be able to look beyond the dollar notes. Then he will be able to take a copy from the shelf. It may be Emerson's Brahma, it may be Bible, Gita, whatever may be. Otherwise, he will better read something management sciences, the latest publication. Now the point is, so similarly, this man, when he was taken away from his road and tied blindfolded to a tree in the forest, he started making noises. And the Upanishads will tell you, you know what he says? He says, Pratmayeda abhinadhaksha anitaha abhinadhaksho visishtaka. I am being brought blindfolded, left blindfolded in this thick forest. This man went on crying and weeping. The Upanishad says. So, this man is now totally helpless. But to feel totally helpless when he is tied blindfolded, he should realize that this is not a very happy situation. Suppose he thinks, I am now in a very happy situation, I am beautifully blindfolded, my hands and feet tied to the tree, I am in thick forest, and so in that case, he may not look upon the blindfold as blindfold. He may not look this bondage as bondage. There are wild animals, but wild animals, tigers and lions are already mentioned here in the Upanishads. He may not look about them as wild animals and tigers. They'll be wonderful friends. They'll be very happy. So Sri Ramakrishna in his parable says, fishermen catch fish. Some fish are very happy. They are in a very wonderful position. I am wonderfully caught in this net. So I need not swim in that water. No. But then the fish, they may not know that they will soon lose their life. They free not only freedom but their life. So even to realize bondage as bondage, imperfection as imperfection, misery as misery, we need some spiritual wisdom. As you know, Swamiji's lectures yesterday and day before yesterday, as you were reading, this life is a state of imperfection. We are coming from perfection and we are heading towards perfection. This present situation, this life as you understand it, is a state of imperfection. So to understand the present state as an imperfect state, this body and all the body related pleasures and pains and sufferings and miseries and enjoyments, these are all ephemeral, these are all transitory, they are all perishable things. To understand the perishability of perishable things, we should have some spiritual wisdom. So the Upanishad says the first requirement is that we must realize the imperfection of worldly life. That's why this man started weeping and crying. Otherwise he will think these thieves are wonderful friends. The bondage is a wonderful state of affairs. So he makes a lot of noise and he goes on crying and weeping. And then what happens, a teacher comes forward. The teacher is a fellow, is a traveler. Now, this teacher in the parable is one who travels backward and forward from Gandhara to Indo-Gangetic Valley. That's the geographical situation of these Upanishads I am just referring to. The road begins somewhere in the Indo-Gangetic Valley and goes all the way to Kabul, Gandhara, Kandahar. So, to be able to give proper direction to this traveler, the poor unfortunate traveler who was robbed by the thieves, this teacher should know exactly in which way he should go to get back to his hometown. And so he should have traveled back and forth many times. So the teacher should be a wise person. If the teacher is a wise person, the traveler is familiar with the route, then he can bring this man to the main road and ask him, you go in this direction. You will reach, you get back to your home. So, tasya yatha abhinahanam pramuchya prabruya edam disham gandhara edam disham vrajayiti gramad gramam prichin pandito methavi gandhara neva upasampadhyeta. Evameva acharivan purusho veda tasya tavadeva chiram yavatna vimokshi atha sampacheti. This is Upanishad. Should I explain? So first that the teacher should know which direction, in which direction lies the hometown, Gandhara, and then you should be able to instruct the unfortunate traveler. And so you go in this way. Then another thing he says, the Upanishad says, this unfortunate traveler, he should have the wisdom to understand that this bondage, this blindfold, all these constitute a very miserable state of affairs. So life in this world, being born, living, making plenty of money, wealth, and in the process suffering a lot and enjoying a lot, and finally dying, well, this is not a very happy situation. So this is the first stage of wisdom. Second stage of wisdom is spiritual life is that he should be able to understand the instructions given by the teacher. So he should medhavi. Medhavi means some purity, shraddha as we call it, of intelligence is essential. Otherwise, we won't understand the true intricacies, the true implication of many of these Sanskrit scriptures. So, once we get a little of these, you suddenly get caught in this, trapped, then we continue our journey. Even if there is no retreat program going on, in our own home, we may take a book and read, and we may discuss, we may meditate, we may do spiritual practice in our own private life. If we have this minimum spiritual fitness, sincere interest. So that's a medhavi. So once you have got that interest, then you'll be able to understand the true implication of the teachings of the scriptures and also the teachings of the teachers. The scriptures can directly tell us, teach us, if our mind is ready, if our mind is pure. But depending upon the level of purity, we understand, depending upon the level of spiritual fitness, we understand the meaning and implication of different spiritual literature. And again, he should be intelligent enough to understand the direction. The spiritual journey is not an easy thing. But you find something very interesting in spiritual life. As we proceed, our own mind slowly develops a kind of self-correcting mechanism. Something within us starts functioning, directing our steps, if you are sincere. Sometimes, many spiritual seekers ask one question. They want a complete road map, like GPS system. So every step should be explained before we start the journey. It is the most stupid thing that anyone can ask. That's because once we start our spiritual journey, suddenly our mind evolves. Our mind itself becomes more and more fit. It becomes more and more refined spiritually. And slowly the mind itself starts guiding us. That's why Sri Ramakrishna makes a very interesting statement, At one stage, mind itself becomes the guru, the teacher. But we should have the sincerity. So it is very foolish to imagine that we will start our spiritual journey only after the whole picture, the whole route map is clear. No, it can never happen. So I can give an example. Suppose you have not read any spiritual literature till now. But somehow somebody suggested that you read a good book on spiritual life. You go to Berkeley University and you spend 1 hour, then you return. That 1 hour of reading will have an effect in your mind. Your mind is not the same. Not that it undergoes a complete transformation, no. But as we imbibe spiritual ideas, and especially as we practice a little bit of spirituality, our own mind slowly evolves. So that mind is different from the mind with which we started to begin with. So in this case, the Upanishad says, the instructor, Acharyavan Purusho Veda, that's a central statement of this particular mantra. The one who has got a real teacher will learn. Of course, the learner also should be fit for that. So that's why Panditaha Medhavi, 2 statements are there. He should be intelligent and he should have the proper purified intellect. Intellect and intelligence, very important. Now, it should be purified. Sincere inquiry will always take us in the right direction. But pretentious intellectualism, often with that strong desire to be seen as intellectual, that won't take us anywhere. So often our mind plays a nasty trick with ourselves. We are not aware of it. We sometimes want to be seen to be intellectual. We want to be considered to be intellectual. a very wonderful thing to be considered to be a highly intellectual person. That won't take us. See, if we go to, one interesting example I can give, Swami Vivekananda was an agnostic. He was very agnostic. He didn't believe in a created God. He was a member of the Brahma Samaj, and the Brahma Samaj people did not believe in image worship. They did not even accept Advaita, non-dualism. Many of these Upanishad statements were interpreted by them during the sermons as pantheistic statements. So if you read Vijay Krishna Goswami, Keshav writings of Rajaram Mohan Roy, not deeply metaphysical, because they did not understand Advaita the way Shankaracharya, Sri Ramakrishna, or later Swami Vivekananda. They expounded all these statements as purely pantheistic or pantheistic statements. So Swamiji was highly influenced by Brahma Samaj, and he was studying the Scottish Church College. And Brahma Samaj was again influenced by Unitarianism. So Swamiji went to Sri Ramakrishna, and he asked questions. Bluntly he asked questions. But Sri Ramakrishna understood this man has something precious in him. He was asking questions out of sincerity and seriousness. So if such a person can be taught, he can become a world teacher. And that's what really happened. Swami Vivekananda became a world teacher. Because he asked questions with such utmost sincerity. Such people will believe if they could be convinced. But pretentious intellectual won't believe. Again they will continue asking questions. And next day they will ask the same questions. They've forgotten they asked the same questions the previous day. But Swami Vivekananda, when he was convinced by Sri Ramakrishna about the truth of Advaita, then he never looked back. And Vivekananda became the greatest prophet of Vedanta in modern times. So sincere inquiry will enable us to go beyond inquiry. Sincere reasoning will help us to go beyond reason. Because our goal is to go beyond, not to live within the limitations. So, in this case, the Upanishad says, if this spiritual pilgrim is intelligent and sincere, Methavi is very important. Metha means pure, sincere intellect, which is capable of learning scriptures and understanding the true implication. To understand the true implication, our intellect should be purified. This Vivekananda understood the truth of Advaita the moment Sri Ramakrishna taught him. Sri Ramakrishna also got it the moment his teacher Totabari taught him. You find this in the life of many great outstanding spiritual teachers. So, in this case, the Upanishad says, the spiritual pilgrim should be able to read the traffic signals, the traffic writings. That's why Gramantaram, Prichan, Pandita Methavi, means from village to village. As he's traveling towards his hometown, hometown is his own spiritual goal. The highest spiritual destination. The highest spiritual experience is the hometown. That is Gandhara Desha. He belongs to that. In fact, we all belong to that. But we have left it far behind, and we are in this world, so we have to go back to that world. So we are left now in this world, in the thick forest of sensory pleasures. We are taken away from the main street by the thieves of our own deeds, maybe good or bad. And then we are tied hand and foot, blindfolded, because many spiritual seekers, before they become spiritual seekers, you can see the Augustine, St. Francis, many. Before they became great spiritual seekers, they were living in this world. And they had no problem with this world. So once they found that this world in which they were living is not so perfect, then they started their attempt to leave it behind. So the Upanishad says, Gramantaram Prichan, you should be able to ask questions with fellow travelers. Suppose so we have to remember in this imagery, in this illustration, you have to remember the unfortunate traveler is the spiritual seeker. The great teacher, the compassionate traveler who takes him out of the blindfold from the thick forest and brings him back to the main street, giving him direction towards Gandhara Desha, towards his hometown, is the spiritual teacher. And the blindfold is the ignorance, the delusion that many people live within, with the conviction this world is wonderful, nothing beyond this. Whole life is meant for enjoyment, sensory enjoyment. This is blindfold. So a sincere teacher will remove this blindfold and take him out of the thick forests and may bring him to the main street. That takes him back to his hometown, which is spiritual realization. That is Gandhara Desha. But he cannot give him a lift in his own ride in American language, in his own car and drop him there. He cannot do. No teacher can do that. No teacher can give you a ride. He can give you directions. So that's why the Upanishad Gramat Gramantaram Prichyam. As he travels forward towards his hometown, there are many villages, there are many interjections, many streets joining together that could create confusion. Sometimes it happens, after some years in Vedanta, suddenly we read the Krishnamurti, that is more wonderful. Then leaving that behind him, something else. So we should really understand the direction of the teacher. Nothing is offended, but everyone may be traveling to the same truth. But we must stick to one road. Suddenly there is in fact, Shankaracharya's commentary is very interesting, very descriptive and very funny also. And only few little blows in here and there to make you wake up. He says, this traveler, suppose this traveler tries to follow the directions of the teacher. And there he finds a wonderful scenery, a flower garden. He leaves the road behind and goes there and sits there enjoying it. He won't get back to his hometown. And he may be caught by a tiger also. That's also possible. Or if he is not very vigilant, he may take the wrong road, which may bring him back from where he started. Or may take him to a precipice, a thick forest, dangerous part of the forest. All these things happened. So he should have the intelligence. As we travel in spiritual life, how do we read the traffic signs, the traffic signals, the writings on the board? Scriptures are the great guides, great spiritual scriptures. And also discussions with fellow spiritual travelers, discussions with other spiritual teachers. All this help us to know which road we must take. At least it will prevent us from taking the wrong road, the wrong path. That's why Gramantaram, he should be able to ask questions. He may see hundreds of villages on his homeward journey. So he must ask people whom he meets on the road, which way I must take, which road I should take to reach my hometown, Gandhara. Means spiritual. What's the right process? What's the right method that I should practice to reach my spiritual home? And then if he is intelligent and is wise and if he has the proper discerning mind, then he will reach his goal. That's why Gandhara neva upasampatyeta. He will get back to his hometown, his spiritual journey. A number of factors involved here. First, he should feel a strong dissatisfaction with this bound and blindfolded state. First, he should realize bondage and bondage. Sometimes we interpret bondage as freedom and freedom as bondage. Freedom for senses is not freedom, it is bondage. Freedom from senses is real freedom. Sometimes there are very strong views among modern thinkers that freedom is the goal of spiritual life. But freedom from what? Sometimes they interpret freedom as from spiritual freedom itself, which is spiritual slavery, which is spiritual anarchy. So first condition is, we must be able to understand bondage as bondage. Second, we must be able to understand the true meaning of instructions. Because once we understand the true implications of instructions, we'll be able to read the traffic signs as we continue a spiritual journey to different practices. Many experiences may crop up. So we'll be able to understand the true implications of those experiences. Mind itself slowly becomes a GPS system, taking us in the right. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. Sri Ramakrishna says, mind itself becomes the Guru. But on one condition, we should be pure and sincere. As I mentioned, in Swami Vivekananda was so sincere, so earnest and earnest. So Sri Ramakrishna found that this young student who dared to ask questions and often even disagree with him was the right person to spread this message around the world. There were many others came who discussed. You find the gospel sometimes. Many others came. There are some. In fact, J.S. Mill's essays on ethics are all discussed in gospel. Very fashionable things. But Sri Ramakrishna says, you can ask questions, but the questions should be accompanied by a sincere, earnest intellect. And then what happens, then we'll be able to understand the true implication of the teacher's instructions, and we'll get back to our hometown. This is an interesting illustration. It comes in the Chandogya Upanishad. Okay, now I think we have time, but I shall begin with another aspect of Vedantic culture that also comes in this Upanishad. Another method of teaching. Here you find one interesting method of teaching, very comprehensive. The whole chapter is a unique exposition of the highest spiritual philosophy, the 6th chapter of Chandogya Upanishad. In the same Upanishad, there is another very interesting episode which you find in another chapter. It comes in the 4th chapter. This is also very interesting. It is also the story of a boy like Nachiketa. This boy, his name was Satyagama. He went to his teacher and he wanted to learn the highest Vedantic truth. The teacher does not give him any instruction directly. Instead, he tells him, you take these cows to a forest, 400 cows. So he had a huge herd of cows, thousands of them. The teacher, his name was Gautama, he selected 400 of the weakest and leanest cows from the whole herd and then asked the boy to take these cows and take them to the forest and return home when the number reaches 1,000. That's again a story may look a bit out of context, but is a deep spiritual implication. A method of teaching with a profound spiritual message behind. So he went to the forest with great sincerity, with great attention. He attended to the needs of the cows. He protected the cows from wild animals, gave them food, gave them water, and finally, after several years of hard work, the total number of the houses reached 1,000. In the process, he practiced meditation as he was instructed by his gurus, means Gautama, and he did fire sacrifice as every brahmachari student was supposed to do morning and evening. And he meditated upon different deities, gods and goddesses. All this he did with great enthusiasm, with an ascetic zeal and shraddha, great faith and sincerity. And finally, the total number of the cows reached 1,000. Then it so happened, one day he found a big bull came to him and started giving instruction. And the bull gave him 1/4 of spiritual wisdom. The story by itself may sound a bit primitive, but as we proceed further, you find one great, profound truth that's common in all spiritual traditions that is brought out here in a very pastoral, simple village setting. So the bull told him, well, I have taught you 1/4. Fire will teach you another 1/4. And then, so the bull told him, Agniste padam bhaktedi, hamsaste padam bhaktedi, magguste padam bhaktedi, like that. The fire will teach you, a swan will come and teach you. That was the conclusion of the instructions given by this fire. And the swan told him another bird means a madgu, means a kind of aquatic bird that dives in water. So all these creatures appeared and taught him 1/4 each of spiritual philosophy, spiritual wisdom. That's how the story goes. Now the question is, what really happened to this boy? As he sincerely followed the instructions of his teacher, with great earnestness and faith, his mind began to evolve. That's what really happens. You find this happening right in our own society. People who practice unselfish service, total unselfishness, sincerity, honesty and truthfulness for a long time, they, without their being aware of it, they start feeling a kind of inner serenity, blissfulness and peace. Where does this come from? It comes from within. So every sincere, unselfish act or spiritual practice slowly removes one outer layer of ignorance. Cover after cover, layers after layer of ignorance may be removed, and slowly the truth, the spiritual reality within, slowly begins to manifest itself. This is what really happened here. So the example of the bull, swan, or the fire and all these creatures were different gods and goddesses entered into them and appeared. That's how the Upanishad story is sometimes interpreted. It's a very, very simple way of illustrating one truth. As we practice sincerity, honesty and spiritual practice, slowly the outer layers of ignorance within us get slowly removed, and the truth that's already within starts manifesting. This is what really happens. That's why religion is a manifestation of divinity already in man. That's Vivekananda's definition. We'll discuss this point further. So today dismissed, we'll have half an hour interaction. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow. So we can raise questions, topics for clarification. 30 minutes.
Swami, I loved the way you told that story. I heard a lot of resonances, with other scripture, like the story of the Good Samaritan in
Yeah.
the Bible, and then the crying and the weeping, like so many of the Psalms, and then also being lost in the forest reminded me of Dante, you know, the beginning where he's lost in the forest.
Yeah.
So it just made me feel that universal teaching and how ancient it is.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
There is a common imagery in many world scriptures. The teacher comes and opens your eyes. So this Vidyaya Mantre Vartamana. In some of our Upanishads and others, Mantridigari, all this you find. We are now spiritually asleep. So teacher comes and makes us wake up,
Yes.
open the eyes.
Yes.
So this idea is common in many world scriptures. And then the imagery of the spiritual pilgrim as follow the directions. And again, as he progresses in his spiritual life, he develops an inner mechanism that starts guiding him on his onward journey. You find in the writings of Saint Teresa of Avila, you often find her looking back, trying to analyze and interpret her own experiences. Maybe the only point of disagreement between Christian mystical literature which describes spiritual life as spiritual journey and Upanishads is that ideal of anthropomorphization of sinfulness, devil, Satan.
Oh, yes.
That's the only difference. But I think it's more a matter of cultural difference.
Yes. Yes.
Because anthropomorphism was part of the Abrahamic tradition,
Yes.
the Hebraic tradition. So naturally it becomes part of it. Just as another aspect may be a natural part of the Upanishadic tradition. So that we can overlook that difference of diversity. So going beyond that, we find the depiction of spiritual life as a pilgrimage towards one's own spiritual home, and meeting obstacles and developing the inner skill between faith in God, faith in Jesus as Christian mystical tradition, to overcome those obstacles and going beyond those obstacles. So this is a common, we could find this commonalities.
Also in Pilgrim's Progress
Yeah.
too, of Christian
Yes,
having to face all of these
looking,
beasts, and then the slough of despond,
Yeah.
that point where he gets so
yeah,
discouraged,
looking backward and trying to
Yes.
understand.
trying to leave that
Yeah.
behind.
I think the idea of Satan comes because of the doctrine of radical sinfulness, which again is a contribution of St. Paul and St. Augustine. So that may, that's make the cultural difference. See, every religion has got certain unique features depending upon the cultural setting in which that religion emerges, takes its birth. But the pastoral setting is common, but many other belief systems may be different from tradition. But these are minor differences
Right.
related to differences in terms of culture and customs and society. You please.
Yes, I have a question. I don't think it's the same question I asked yesterday.
No.
But going back to the Upanishads parable. Okay, I'm ignorant. I'm blindfolded. I'm tied up, and in the modern world, many teachers will emerge offering a phony product, a medicine man, a false guru. Of course, this would never happen in Vedanta society. It's a conjectural question.
It happens in all traditions, You see, spirituality, religion, spirituality sometimes could be hijacked by.
So I'm already ignorant. I don't have the tools
Yeah.
at this point to recognize
Yes.
whether or not the preceptor is the right one to follow. I'd like to wave off the ones that will misdirect me, but I'm in a state of ignorance at that point.
Well, there's one way, one very, very logical and very reasonable way to judge. If somebody tells you, I am bringing this new truth for the first time in human history, it is not mentioned in any scripture anywhere. This is my patent right. Reject it. That's one important. In fact, this idea is not mine. This is Swami Vivekananda's judgment. Swami Vivekananda himself says, if somebody tells you, believe me, don't believe this is something new, not mentioned anywhere. Suddenly I got it from some age, somebody appeared and gave me, it's mine, reject it. That's what Swamiji says. It's a very interesting. Again, another way is, if the teaching creates conflicts within you, and also if it leads to fanaticism, because anything that is divorced from tradition, whenever a teacher claims exclusive right for that message, it's a kind of fanaticism. And Vivekananda says, reject him. In the inspired talks that he delivered in the Thousand Island Park, it's no branch of there, Swamiji makes a statement. If somebody tells you anything in terms of exclusivism, fanaticism, or he alone can, then that part I remember, reject him. He uses this twice, reject him. You need not quarrel with him, but you can understand what he wants. Because no one can bring a new truth and lay exclusive claim to it.
But there's also instinct involved, yes?
Maybe in interpretation may be different. What do you say?
Instinct.
Eh? Instinct.
Instinct. There may be
Yeah.
something not fully understood, a subconscious element.
Yeah, yes, it could be. If that person tells you this is a new method of interpretation, that's fine. A new way of presentation, that's fine. But a new truth is totally unacceptable. You can't anybody who says this is something which I brought forth as my special contribution. Swamiji's greatness was, he never claimed it. It's very interesting. He never claimed it. Shankaracharya never claimed it. Buddha also never claimed it. That's why Buddha tells 554 Buddhas, it took a long time to evolve into real Buddha, all these stories you find. Christ says, I came to fulfill, not to destroy. Later, theologians may impose a novelty on later prophets. But the prophets themselves did not detach themselves from their roots and pretend to be a new phenomenon. No. They may teach an ancient truth in a new language, using new vocabulary, new interpretation. That's a function of every great teacher. He has to change the language, the way of presentation, depending upon the changing conditions and demands of society. But the truth by its truth itself cannot be new. That's the best way to understand.
If one is so cynical that one rejects every teacher that emerges as though they're not good enough, then you stay bound to the tree. Is that right? There has to be an end to cynicism.
If he rejects everyone, nothing wrong in that. Because one day he will come to something. But if he accepts one and says there's only one, everything else is wrong, then you have to reject him. It's far better to be an atheist than to be a terrible fanatic. Because fanaticism is more dangerous, more destructive. Atheism is really not so destructive or dangerous. Many great atheists became great mystics. Fanatics never become mystics.
Swami, in regard to atheism, I mean, my understanding of atheism is simply somebody who rejects anthropomorphism of religion and of principles. In other words, he rejects the anthropomorphical interpretation of spiritual truths. Sort of that there, then that would be also exclusivity.
Yeah, I think in Western religious tradition, an atheist is one who rejects God. This
Which is
religion.
anthropomorphic.
But in Vedantic tradition, an atheist is one who rejects the authenticity of the Vedas. In the sense that he rejects the existence of an absolute reality. That's a charge leveled at Buddha, which is really not true. Because all that you find in Buddhism coming from the whole of this Ashtanga Yoga, the right view, the right right-mindedness, right livelihood, right faith, right concentration, all these actually from Gita. And then the Four Noble Truths, the recognition of this world as an imperfect thing. It is part of Vedantic tradition. But then, of course, these are interpretations. Buddha was not an atheist, he was an agnostic. Anything somebody raised.
And Swami Vivekananda said an atheist is one who rejects the eternal truth.
Yes, that's the reality. But that Swami Vivekananda says an atheist is one who rejects himself, his own spiritual entity. That's what Swamiji says. I think in that sense, maybe Christopher Hitchens would not have done it. He was very proud and somewhat arrogant, or little bit of an arrogant person. So very humanistic.
What is the symbolism or the importance of the bull and the swan?
I will come to that. Yes. So you find there are four stages of spiritual realization in the life of the boy. First comes Rishabha, or the bull. The second one is fire, Agni. The third one is swan, Hamsa. Fourth one is Margu, a diving bird, which is a kind of aquatic bird. Okay. Now the point is, the story. Now, first I shall tell the story, then I will try to give the symbolism. In the story itself, the Upanishad says, when the total number of cattle reached 1,000, we showed the sincerity, the dedication, the purity of this little boy, because he considered looking after the cows as a spiritual practice. So practically his whole purity, concentration, everything he put into that work, so became spiritually enlightened. If one can put one's whole soul into something without any selfish motive, even if you draw a painting, even you construct a building, if you can put your whole mind without the least of selfishness into that, with full concentration, you get the level of concentration which naturally comes to a meditator or a sage. So in this case, what happened? When this boy observed all the instructions of his teacher and he considered looking after the cattle as a spiritual practice, which he did with full attendant concentration, then what happened? God appeared to him in the form of the bull. That the story goes. But when you come to symbolism, one big layer of ignorance was removed from his mind. So he became wise. The 1/4 of spiritual truth was taught to him by the bull. That is Upanishad story, which means 1/4 of the layer of ignorance was removed from his mind. Which means 1/4 of the reality, spiritual truth was revealed. The second symbolism is Agni, fire. Fire is Agni, is a god, a deity in Vedic tradition. And every day this boy used to practice Agni-athana. It's called, means a kind of fire sacrifice, which every brahmachari student has to practice in Gurukula, in Guru's hermitage. So this boy was doing that as he was instructed by the teacher, along looking up the cow. So one day, that fire, he heard a voice coming from the fire. And the fire taught him another 1/4 of spiritual truth, which means another 25% of his ignorance was removed. So he was spiritually progressing. Again, the swan came, the same thing happened. The God appeared to him in the form of a swan, and he taught him it. Means he may have meditated. So all these things must have happened to him internally. So as he progressed in his spiritual practice, looking after the cows and all rituals, so much of attention and purity of mind, so many layers of ignorance were removed from his mind, so much of spiritual wisdom was progressively revealed to him. That is symbolism.
Thank you.
You can find this happening, as I mentioned earlier. If a person undertakes a noble task, whether you believe in God or not is a different matter. Belief in God is not a necessary ingredient, it's helpful, that's all. So with utmost sincerity and honesty and purity, if the person does that, you find suddenly some layers of his mind, some layers of ignorance, and all this will be removed. You can find a story in the illustration of a housewife in the Mahabharata, which I can, in the Vyadha story, maybe I should narrate another day.
Thank you.
Right.
Well, I was wondering about those creatures. They seem like perhaps with each one they're a little less earth connected, and there's a little more sense of the ethereal and of not being connected to the earth so much. I mean, the bow is very
In
much of
reality,
the earth.
all these creatures are part of the setting, the geographical and cultural setting in which the boy was looking at the cat. It's the fire. Every day he has to do fire sacrifice. So he felt the fire was speaking to him. While doing the fire sacrifice, a great truth was revealed to him, which he interpreted as instruction coming from the fire god. Again, in the pastoral setting, he may have seen lakes and rivers, swan and aquatic birds. As he meditated sitting on the lake, on the banks of the lake or river, he may have felt they speaking to them.
Yes. It's
That's
more
what we
freedom,
learn.
maybe more freedom.
That's why Emerson went to that pond. What do you call the pond? Emerson? Walden went.
Yeah.
Walden Pond.
Thoreau.
I said he got this idea, Thoreau. He got this idea when you sit in nature, in close proximity with the beautiful, grand nature, and if you can meditate without thinking about dollars or the stock markets, then suddenly you find great truth. Suddenly, please don't mind, because I'm trying to put things in a very sharp language to drive home the contrast.
Right.
Because in every such situation, the moment our mind is taken away from the grandeur, the beauty of the lake, and when it's busy with something else, then we lose that mystical message that comes from the pond or the river or the fire or anything. That's a mystery of great poets who did that. If their minds are not divided into compartments, so when you find that all these great sublime hymns of Veda were written and they were revealed to the sages when they were sitting on the Himalayan hermitages, the banks of Indus, Ganga, and so on. All the whole Rigvedic Samhita, or grand poetry, which were translated into so many European languages within almost 30 years. And many of them read it. They could not have read it in the original language. They read only translations. They were transformed. So what was so magical about them? They were all written by saints and sages. Written in the sense they were revealed to them as they sat in the forest hermitages or the river banks. That's why, because their mind was focused on that. That explains this, the transcendentalist writing this thing. Great ideas come to you when you are in solitude, along with nature. when mind is not broken into pieces, one piece of mind is not busy with some of the most earthly, worldly things.
And Swami Wordsworth refers to that
Lake District, yeah.
as a state of wise passiveness.
Yes.
And in one of his poems, he talks about discovering sermons in stones and
Yeah.
good in everything.
Good everything.
And it's a little bit like this,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yes.
It's so beautiful.
Swami, what distinguishes the true inner voice from a clever intellect?
Oh, no, the clever intellect will not give you a sense of inner peace and blissfulness. The cleverest of intellect cannot do that.
If it's clever enough, it can trick you. Is it just
No, cleverness, because we have a system within us that
It's a great art.
distinguishes one from the other. It is an inner experience. Through clever philosophy, we will not get inner peace of mind. If it is real, it doesn't function at the level of intellect, it functions at the level of mind, which is deeper. Intellect is very superficial and it's changeable. But what we intensely feel mentally, we won't lose it. Because we all live at mental level, not intellectual level. So clever intellect, in a way, clever intellect can never give us the inner poise, inner blissfulness, inner feeling of fulfillment.
So that's what one would look for in a teacher as well as within themselves.
Yes, a teacher cannot completely give this to anybody in a platter.
So they would have it themselves.
They will have it, but that may not be accepted or understood by everyone. Impossible. In fact, we all learn depending upon our own equipment. We can only learn what we are fit to learn. So that's what happens in this case. The boy evolved. Suddenly, he found things revealed to him. If he had not evolved, he would not have heard this voice at all. You find he suddenly felt the bull was speaking. He felt the fire was speaking. He felt the swan was speaking. So is the aquatic bird. So when he went back home, the teacher, Gautama, looked at him. The teacher told, you have the peace of mind within. The teacher understood. A clever person will not hear that voice. If he claims to have heard that voice, then that person, you can see, he will be still suffering from depression, he will be suffering from all kinds of melancholy, all problems. On the other hand, if he gets a little bit of that, you will remove all these things. So, actually, perhaps there was no voice at all. He felt there was a voice talking to him. And that experience was because of his own evolution. That's why, as we evolve, we learn. We really can learn only as much as we ourselves evolve. In fact, in the Upanishadic philosophy, it is very clearly stated. Even intellectual understanding of Upanishadic philosophy properly needs a lot of higher mental refinement. Even to understand, because if you have learned from, I met many great pandits, not all of them saints or sages, professional pandits. They have studied all this. But when they teach, you can see the difference. And of course, I had the privilege to learn from a very great monk who passed away chanting these mantras, who was in a coma. Of course, I don't normally mention this. We don't have tradition. We don't mention. He was suffering from high diabetes, and he was almost 85 years old. And he stopped taking medicine. He wanted to leave this body, and he fell into coma. Suddenly, became conscious, and he was chanting Shiva's mantras. And again, he became silent, and slowly passed away. So I never felt the same thing. I felt by learning from him when I was learning from professional academic pandits. So you often feel we learn only as much as we evolve. Otherwise, it doesn't have any impact. Intellectually, it has some value, no doubt. Even I tell you, even intellectually, instead of discussing worldly matters, if we can discuss Upanishad philosophy, it has got a merit. It is not futile completely. Even if intellectually we try to discuss these things, it is good. But then it is not the ultimate. Intellect alone, without mental refinement, cannot understand even the intellectual meaning of the Upanishadic statements. That's why we find as we grow old and spiritually as we grow, we find new dimensions, new meanings and new possibilities of interpretation of the great statements that we may have read 20 or 30 or 40 years back. It's not so? That is true even in poetry, in literature, and it is much, much more true in spiritual literature. As we evolve, you find higher and deeper and more sublime meanings revealed. Vivekananda came and preached, but you can't say, oh, he lived for 39 years, preached all over the world. You can't say all who listened to him were transformed. He didn't mean that, nor his guru. So how many went to Sri Ramakrishna and met him? All of them did not become Vivekananda. That happens. But then some impact will be always there. If not now, tomorrow. That's it. That's why nothing is lost and you are never too late. That's a great message in Vedanta. Nothing is lost and you are never too late. If not now, maybe 100 births later. Can we raise the question? Okay, 10:30. Okay, fine. No, 2 minutes. One more. Last question,
I
please.
wanted to ask, I have read that the birds in early morning they sing Samveda, and even in Panchavati Thakur used to probably listen, and Brahmanandaji also probably. So is that depends on the person who is hearing it that gets it, or what?
Yeah, really, because Sri Ramakrishna was living in the world of Samaveda, great spiritual truth, so he heard. When he was a boy of 5 years old, he was walking in the paddy field and he saw the cranes, and the white cranes, dark clouds, and he entered into samadhi. Now that's because his mind was in that world. So the picture, the colors, the color scheme, all suddenly had that impact. He got a vision. So very often it happens. It's all subjective inner process, nothing objective. At objective level, something may suggest, but what really happens is within ourselves. That's why, to be very frank, even to intellectually understand the true meaning of, philosophical meaning of Vedanta, we need spiritual practice. That's why in India, the greatest teachers are not academics teaching universities. The greatest teachers of Veda and Vedanta are the saints and sages who have been teaching for thousands of years as part of the teacher-disciple tradition, succession. They are the upholders of Vedanta and Vedic truths, not the university professors who come for seminars. Please, I don't mean any offense, but I want to state a fact which is obvious to many, of course. Westerners, there are many Western Swamis who are teaching in Divine Society, all these Upanishads you find. They are inspired, learn from them. You can ask, many of them know. They have left everything behind and go to Himalaya and staying there, you find them. They joined that succession, the parampara. They preserve the real tradition. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.